Okay, so my quick 10-minute thought has become like 3 hours once this is done. But I want the final thing to talk about is coming back to this idea of wheat and chaff. Um, I don't think I touched solidly enough on this idea of the symbolism of breaking the hull away from the wheat berry. That's what the internal seed is called. So the hull is fibrous, it's non-edible, and it's a real pain in the butt to get off. You really have to whack it. It takes an immense amount of work in processing this stuff. It's way more work than actually chopping down the grain. It's the part that makes everybody grumpy. So I think I probably don't have to say too much about this for you to connect the dots, but what is a broken heart and a contrite spirit? Maybe we'll just leave it at that, because there's a bunch of ways we could take this. So you kind of have to get whacked with supersized nunchucks to have a broken heart and a contrite spirit. It's a phrase we're familiar with, and we lose the intended meaning. And people go around thinking they have a broken heart and a contrite spirit, where very much their hearts are still attached on the things of the world. And there are lots and lots of ways you can test for this, and I won't go into that right now. Maybe I'll just say, how would you feel if everything you value was taken from you? I mean, it's funny because it's such an extreme thing to try to imagine. If from one day to the next, everything you value was taken away from you, what would you have left? And whatever loss you would experience through that, that is your measure of how much your heart is focused on things other than God. And what do I mean by that? When your heart is focused on God, whatever you value cannot be taken away. So Jesus said a man's abundance is not in the things that he has. It's not in your stuff. It's not even in your relationships. There are a lot of people who idolize relationships. God is above even that. He's above all things. That's the reason why the first commandment is have no other gods before me, is because it's true. And so your disobedience to that commandment is just a measure of your deviation from reality. And you can't encounter the flow of good beyond the extent to which you're turned away from reality. That's just, it's one for one. You can't separate that. So if you experience loss, if you're still capable of experiencing loss, that is a measure of how far your heart is from God. Another way of putting that is how many things you've allowed to take a higher priority than God. Because if he is the highest priority, everything else is subsumed to that connection. This could be a huge topic, so I'm just going to roll. So when your heart is truly broken and your spirit is truly contrite, that is one the same as saying that your desires are fully aligned with God and fully connected to God. And no other thing or person or situation or feeling is supreme to that. And there's a very valuable thing that I could tell you right now, and I don't know how to say it. I can say it very simply, believe it or not. But I don't know how to say it without communicating the value of it, so I will not say it. So moving on then, when the hull is broken, it exposes what's inside. And without exposing that, you can't subject it to the winnowing, to the throwing up and the wind blowing and then the burning the chaff. You have to break it open and expose it first. So what's that all about? So as long as you're deeply connected to all these things and people and everything else that's not God, and as long as you're not integrated in what you really are and want and could be, as long as that's not fully integrated with what's outside of you, like what you project to the world and why you do what you do and how much you acknowledge internally why you do what you do, and how much you tune what you do to why you should do it and what you should do, and all these things, those all need to be fully aligned. And inasmuch as they're not, when those blows come, both the blows of the supersized nunchucks and the blows of the wind, when they come, they will not help you. Because when the seed is still in the hull, it just drops to the ground. It doesn't take away the bad stuff. And when the fires come, they will burn you because the stuff outside of you is flammable. So when it blows away, the fire's on the stuff that blows away. Doesn't affect you. Don't take that too far, but it affects you in a very different way, let's say that, in a positive, beneficial way. It's almost like the way God designed this whole world to work can't work for your good as long as you're holding to all this garbage that is not really who you are as a child of God. Do you understand how babies and spirits and everything work? So, you know how babies can't talk for a really long time and they're super dependent on their moms for a really long time? And people have come up with theories for why this is, and, you know, evolution this, big brain that, whatever. Well, whatever. But one valuable aspect of all of that is that it takes a great deal of time for your brain to develop the capacity to fully connect to your spirit. I'll just sort of put it that way and leave it at that. In that time, it's like a cooling off period where your body's not as susceptible to all the enticements that direct it away from God. And it's like a grace period that's on a gradient as you develop as a human. It's a grace period on a gradient that gives you a head start for your spirit to affect your body, because it's not a fair fight in the beginning. Once you hit maturity, the odds reverse. A lot more could be said about this, a lot more. That has to do with the actual capability we hit the ground with coming to Earth. But the reason I mentioned this is we reverse the intended flow. And it ought to be your spirit affecting your body much more than the other way around. There are caveats to that I don't want to get into right now, but in the ways that you'll think about what I'm saying, that's probably good enough. So it's really important for us to exercise our ability to choose how integrated we are as a system. And we have our bodies, we have our spirits, and we have access to the Spirit of God. And how fully we integrate those three things, it makes all the difference. I'd say in the world, but it's also in the world to come. The choices we make are very important in those fields, those angles, the situations. So I mentioned with the wheat and the chaff and the benefit that you get out of what this world has to offer, very much rate limited by how integrated you are as a person, how much of yourself that you see, and how much of your motives that you see, and what you do to align those with the best that you can imagine. And I'll give you one other nugget here. Your ability to see the world is determined by your willingness to see yourself. Your ability to see the world is determined by your willingness to see yourself. Inasmuch as you willfully ignore who and how you really are, and who and how you have the potential to be, you also willingly blind yourself to how God is. And that is very important. And so one of the books that I'll be publishing here, if I ever stop making videos instead of working on it, is on the character of God. It's a series. And a big theme in that series that I'm not fully done organizing yet is the importance of seeing yourself in order to better see God. Now, this is bi-directional, and the more you see of God, the more you see of yourself too, because his light, it quickens your eyes, and then you have eyes to see yourself even more clearly. But one huge obstacle to getting to that is allowing the continuance of impediment in how we see ourselves, how accurately, how fully, because we have all these dark corners and we don't like to look in those, and we really don't like when other people do or say anything that draws attention to those. This is another aspect of hidden holiness. If you find someone who truthfully believes that the greatest gift that someone can give them is to help them see a fault that they did not see before, or to give them a ladder of improvement up from something that they didn't know could be improved upon about themselves. If you find someone who treasures that, you have found someone who is very holy, at least in that regard. But what you'll find is that everything is connected to everything else. And our righteousness and our wickedness, they, on the one hand, wickedness will anchor you. If you're wicked in one way, it will anchor your progress in all other ways to a certain ceiling. And if you're holy in a certain way, and someone can see that, someone gains perception of that, even if they can't see everything else, it is a very safe assumption, because of that anchor principle, that the things that you can't see are somewhere in the neighborhood of the things that you can when it comes to holiness. So both of these things shed light on everything else. Anyway, so hopefully that's the last echo from that first video I made today, and I've shared a lot with you. I hope that you find benefit in it and that you apply it in all the ways that you can in your life.